on YouTube specifically, and he paid to fly them to Antarctica. And he said, basically, if you see the sun go in a circle around, then the Earth can't be flat. Because let's go back to this. Let's go back to one of these models here. Let's see. Do I have a model? I like these ones better that I've just shared with you. Here we go. We'll use this one. Okay, this one's closer to like the modern flat Earth model or whatever, right? So in the modern flat Earth model, pretend like there are no mountains in Antarctica. It's just all flat, right? And the sun would go and it would just spiral around. If this is true, no matter if it's summertime or wintertime, you would never have a 24-hour sun in Antarctica if the entire world is just flat and stays flat, right? Due to perspective, sun would go around, it would disappear. It would come back, it would be nighttime, it would be daytime. You wouldn't watch as the sun just goes around in a big fat circle, right? According to that map. So because they did see the sun do this, and modern academics has a model that's, you know, or a theory and a model that explains this, the 24-hour sun, then these, you know, a few flat earthers, you know, defected or they stopped believing in it. Which I respect. That's their decision. I haven't changed my opinion whatsoever. I don't believe that the luminaries, I don't believe that the shape of the land has any bearing whatsoever on the movement of the luminaries, in general, right? But I'm going to show you how that's possible and how the dome is what creates the luminaries, as I've just shown to you, right? And their path that they take and stuff. But perspective is key when understanding this. I didn't see who that was, but high five to you. Thank you for your support. All right. So anyways, these flat earthers went to Antarctica. They watched the sun, boom, go around. And they're like, oh my God. Okay. So the earth is not flat. The map is wrong. This whole, what do you call it? Model is wrong, which by the way, it's not really a model. This right here is a picture. And if anything, it's a map, right? A model would be more three-dimensional. A model would definitely include or should include the dome, in my opinion, all right? A better model would include the different portions of the dome, like the apex dome at the top, you know, the underworld and all this other stuff too. But anyways, so let's get to, I'll show you, I'm going to use my model here. I have a drawing that I'll share with you. Let me see if I can get it pulled up in full. There we go. That should work. Now, as you can see, let me give you a disclaimer. None of this is to scale. There's probably problems with this and stuff. This is just a general concept, just as those prior pictures I showed you from ancient history are also general concepts, just so you can, you know, have an image so that it'll jumpstart your imagination and you can, you know, start to put pieces together yourself. So the white portion is the dome, the firmament, right? I just made it white because it's ice or whatever. The brown portion is the earth, as has been depicted in ancient cosmologies. I purposefully made the sides of it stick way up like this to represent the pillars of heaven, or the portion of the earth that is the crater portion, right? It might not even, you know, it might not look like a horn or whatever. Like I said, you know, this could just be flat and it could just totally be a crater or whatever. But this is the area that we're going to focus in on. Okay, so let me make this particular portion a bit bigger so we can understand this. Now, this at the top, this is the apex dome. So I told you how the firmament bows in at the top, and there's massive amounts of proof for the apex dome, especially if you look at drawings from the Dark Age and artwork from the medieval times and stuff. They actually draw the apex dome all the time. This is the sun. So this yellow dot right here, this is the circuit that it goes through. The sun's circuit, it spins around, right? So down here on the ground, we've got the water, right? We've got little continents and mountain ranges and stuff that I've drawn in there. And if you're on the surface or the base of this snow globe type system, right? If you're on the surface, when this circular sun moves away from you, because of perspective, you'll see it look like it's dipping down over the horizon and disappearing or whatever, right? So let's take a look and let's compare this to the quote-unquote final experiment and see how it could be possible on an alternative with an alternative cosmology to see a 24-hour sun, right? So let's say that this point, let me make this even bigger actually. Make this really big here. All right, very good. Hopefully this is good enough. Now, let's say that where my little, let me get a pointer. All right. Boom, pointer. One moment. All right, cool. Here's my pointer. Now, let's say, see where this blue beam is? All right. That represents, see how I have an arrow pointing up? Let's say this is like the southern tropic, the Tropic of Capricorn. So that's the point at which the sun, the luminary, the point of focus, goes its furthest south before it starts to come inward, okay? So if you look straight up, directly underneath that point, the sun would be at the zenith of the sky at midday. Okay, so the sun would be directly above you. Now, if we look at things from an ancient cosmological view and we continue going south, the land will start to slope up. The land will rise in elevation. Now you might think to yourself naturally, because you imagine gravity, right? And gravity's pulling everything down, so everything should just fall back down. That's not so. And I'll explain to you scientifically why I believe that's not so. Okay, but let's just say it is so for now, that's how the land is shaped, right? If you were able to stand, let me make this even bigger. It's difficult to make these models sometimes because of the sizes we have to make things. Anyways, if you were able to stand, let's say that this horn of the Earth represents Antarctica, okay, which it does. If you were able to stand there, right? And, you know, the ground just felt normal. You were being pulled downward towards the ground, right? And you look straight up. Your straight up is different now from the people who are down here on the surface. Your zenith of your sky is this direction. Or depending on the slope, you know, the angle of the slope, it could be that direction, you know what I mean? It could be a different direction. But like I said, the model, this little map I drew is not perfect. It's just to jumpstart your brain to different ideas. But let's say we've got Jaron and Whitsitt and the other guys that went to Antarctica, right? And they look upwards. This would be their view, hypothetically speaking, okay? Now, keep in mind, the people down here in South America, when they look up at summertime and they see the sun at the midpoint in the sky, it is stopped right over here. Bam. And it's going to go back around this way. But the perspective is entirely different whenever you're in Antarctica on the sloping portion of the world. And I'll explain a lot of different stuff too. Okay. So like they're not going to be able to see the land. All this, like the whole Earth, they're not going to be able to see that. But they will be able to see the sun. They will be able to see the focal point. So when they look up, this is their zenith of their sky. And what they will see in its entirety, or what we should expect to see, is they should see the sun making a circle around their zenith as it actually just goes about its normal path in the sky. Does that make sense? I mean, do you understand the concept? You know what I mean? If I say does it make sense, I'm not saying do you agree with that. I'm just saying, does the concept make sense? You know what I mean? As I'm presenting it. You don't have to agree with it. I'm just saying, I hope it makes sense to you. That if somebody is standing over here, and this is Antarctica, which it is, I believe. I completely believe that this is so far, right? They would look up, and this is their sky now, right? It's a completely different sky. They would see a different sky than these people down here, right? They would watch the sun move in a circle around this point, their zenith of their sky, their midday sun, their midday, straight up for them, right? So that's why I drew these little arrows that show this, because that's how the sun looks to them. Okay, the sun looks like it's just going in a circle around where they are, all the way around. Does that make sense? All right, cool. So let's answer a few questions that would naturally come to mind. One, why don't people slide down? Like, it's not gravity. I'm not going to say that. I don't believe in gravity. I believe that gravity is modern academics' label that they've put on an observation, which is the opposite of buoyancy. That's it, really. So let's discuss this. How is it that people can, and now we can push this even further, okay? Because if people can stand on the side of the world like that and they don't slide down or anything, they just stick to it, that also implies that they can walk all the way up, or if they can survive the extremes of the dome, they would be able to walk all the way up, and they would see and encounter a land larger than the United States beyond the South Pole. Once you get down here, everything is the south. Okay, your magnets are going to spin and go crazy, right? But I watched a video where somebody was talking to Jaron, and this is, you know, I don't have anything against Jaron. Like I said, I'm super thankful for all he's contributed throughout the years. But he made this point saying that he's perplexed because if everybody decided to go walk to the South Pole on a globe, they would just meet at the South Pole on the bottom. But at a flat Earth, that wouldn't happen because they'd all go in opposite directions, and one person be over here, one person be over here. And this reconciles that. Because if everyone in the world, remember this map that I've drawn you here is 360 degrees. It's a round, all right? This is a two-dimensional slice of it, right? But let's say you put people in the middle at the North Pole and told them all to go to the South Pole. They would spread out at first, but they would all eventually get to the pillars of the heavens, where they would start walking upwards, and I'll explain how it is they don't slide down in a minute. They would continue walking, as Admiral Byrd said, past the South Pole, over a land that is larger than the United States, right, full of resources or whatever, and then they would end up at the true South Pole, which is this up here. Directly below this would be Mount Meru. I should have probably drawn a little Mount Meru right there, okay? So imagine Mount Meru, the magnetic mountain at the center of the world, which accounts for the North Pole and northern polarity, right? Above so it's the magnetism creates a toroidal field. I should probably draw this. Let me just draw it. Hold on, let me draw this. I could just draw it. All right, let me just draw this real quick. We'll use pink, I guess. All right, just give me 1 second. I'm going to draw this out so I don't have to use my hand. All right, boom. So let's say we got Mount Meru right here. Whip it, pow. There's Mount Meru. All right, cool. Now, the magnetism is going to create like a toroidal field that goes like this, okay? And this is not to scale, okay? So bear with me. All right, it's going to create a toroidal field. Boom. So all this on the side is going to wrap all the way around. That would be southern magnetism all the way down behind me here, right? This at the top is the opposite of the north, which means this is the South Pole, the true South Pole. It's just directly opposite of the North Pole, right? This is how it would work on a disc-shaped magnet, okay? Give or take. But this up here is south. This would be, if everyone in the world went outward from the center point, they would travel along the land at first in completely different directions. But if they continued and they did not stop until they got to true south, every single one of them would meet right back here above the North Pole. And they would be upside down to these people down here. Or these people inversely would be upside down to them up here. Now, let me tell you why it is that they could stand upside down at the roof of the world and not fall, right? Because there is no such thing as gravity. Okay, nothing is sucking everything down just towards the Earth. I'll explain how that works right now. Let me get rid of this magnetism deal. Oops. Sorry. I'll leave little pink Mount Meru right there. All right, cool. Now, let's get back to the sides, okay? Actually, let's do this. Let's start with the middle. Let's start with space. Okay, understanding how things can float in space is going to help you to understand how people can stick to the edge of the world and walk all the way up to the roof if they had the right protective equipment or whatever, right? So let's go with space, the concept of space. Now, let me offer to you a different idea, that space is not just going beyond how they portray it, but the space is actually just way high up in the sky, and it's the space between the surface and the apex of the dome, which is right here. Okay, that is space, and that's why it's called space. Space exists between two objects. Everybody should know that, right? It's pretty basic. Now let's talk about pressure and pressure's effect on buoyancy. Okay, now let's say that this world was like a balloon. Right? Just forget all of this. Just imagine a balloon. I blow up a balloon and it becomes a gigantic sphere And that is our hypothetical world that we're imagining in our minds, okay? Where does the pressure exist? If you were to look this up, artificial intelligence would tell you that the pressure is equally spread throughout the entire inside of the balloon, but that's not true. If you press it, it will tell you that, well, there's a tiny bit more pressure in the center of that balloon, but it's negligible. Don't believe that negligible stuff. There's no such thing as negligible when you're dealing with things scientifically, okay? It's either different as a pressure gradient or it's not, and it's equal all throughout. It's mathematics, really, right? So what is my point? My point is, if this world is like a balloon, right? And there's air on the inside and it's pressurized because it's a closed system, at the center, and I used to believe the opposite of this. At first I was under the impression that all the pressure would actually be around the edges, but I no longer think that, okay? So now it seems to me that the pressure would exist right in the middle, the most pressure, right? But when we throw in a focal point, which contributes a massive amount of heat, it changes pressure, right? Heat will change pressure in a fluid in a closed system, right? So this focal point is going to manipulate the pressure within this closed system. I'll make it very simple. I'll make it very plain. In the middle, remember the sun does not exist in the middle. It goes around the middle, okay? So in the middle, you wouldn't have all that heat from the sun, okay? In the middle, you would have all that pressure from all the atmosphere that is up in every direction from it in the middle. When you have all that pressure in that fluid, which is the atmosphere in this contained system, the more pressure you have, the more buoyancy you will have, the more buoyant objects will be, okay? So for example, all that pressure creates density, okay? So it makes all those gases more dense. When you increase the density of a fluid, it makes it much easier for things to float within that fluid. So as an example, take the Salt Sea, right, over in the Middle East. It's a sea entirely of salt. And one of the big deals is people go there and they're like, oh, look at me, I can just float. Like I can't drown in the salt sea. Your body will just naturally be buoyant. That's because there's so much density. The water has so much salt in it, it's become extremely dense. And therefore, it makes you lightweight in comparison. Right? So you can look at this center portion or space right here in the middle as being very pressurized and very dense. There is atmosphere up there, okay? It's not like our atmosphere that's down here and homogenized on the surface or whatever, but they still have a lot of pressure and it creates more density. Okay, when you increase the pressure, you increase the density. And because there's increased density, things float. The buoyancy is dramatically increased in quote-unquote space between the ground and the sky. So I hope that particular part makes sense. Now the opposite of that is also true, right? Where do I go from here? I'm trying to build bridges in my mind. Now, this focal point, the sun, it's going to change the pressure. It's going to create pressure systems and weather patterns and stuff like that in our world. There is wind that comes off of it, okay? So it will move the fluid, this is what we call wind, is the movement of the fluid that we live in called atmosphere. This focal point that heats up will heat up the surrounding atmosphere, and that atmosphere will move from areas of hot to areas of cold, okay? Which creates a wind. This is solar wind, okay? Like, I believe academics, there's some truth to what they say, it's just that they apply it to what I believe is a fantasy world. Now I'm not saying they're purposefully lying or anything. I just don't think that they have a good grasp on the reality. But anyways, so this wind will leave and it will move in the opposite direction as that the sun is traveling in. So if the sun moves from east to west like that direction, the wind that comes off of it will move that way. This is the jet stream moving in the opposite direction. Now that jet stream exists around the area of the sun, going up and down and everywhere around the sun. Okay, so it's going to create these winds in that area, but there will be an area of calm in the middle space. okay, right here in the center. Now, the solar winds, the jet stream that's created, displaces the atmosphere. When you displace the atmosphere, it changes the pressure. Okay, so now we have areas of higher pressure and areas of lower pressure, where the furthest away from this is going to be lower pressure. The air is displaced and stuff, and it gets colder and stuff like that, so you have low pressure systems, which creates rain and snow and stuff like that, right? So if we go really far away from the focal points to the extremities of the world, that will be the lowest pressure areas of all. What does that mean? That means that there's such low pressure way out here. Remember, it's going to be the opposite as in the middle. In the middle, there's so much pressure that it creates more density, and therefore objects float. It's the opposite on the outside. There's so low of pressure way out here that the density is lessened, and therefore objects are heavier. And you can look this up, even within academics, they will tell you it's negligible. However, a person that is standing at the equator weighs less than a person who's standing in Antarctica or at the North Pole, they say. Okay, so you're heavier in Antarctica, according to modern academics. This is why you're heavier, is because of the pressure differential and you know, the different gradients that we just talked about, right? All right, so let's focus on Antarctica now. Now that we understand how buoyancy works within quote-unquote space, okay? Because there's increased pressure, therefore increased density, therefore objects float, increased buoyancy, okay? Just like the salt sea. Now, out here, there is low pressure, right? The air is being displaced, it's constantly moving around, okay? I don't know, I'm trying my best to describe this and in ways that make sense for everybody. So let's say we have our people and they walk up Antarctica, walk up the sides over here. Now what's happening is not that they're being, that this area has such a strong gravitational pull. There is no gravity. What's happening is the fluid that they are in, which is the atmosphere, is now, there's less pressure. There's a low pressure system, right? Extremely low pressure the further away you get. Because there's less pressure, that equates to less density of those objects. Damn, hold on. I'm trying to keep it together in my mind right now. There's less pressure at the sides, right? Therefore, things weigh more basically, and they sink. Okay? Simply put, they sink down within the fluid or the medium, which is the atmosphere. So this sinking takes them to the bottom, which to them, this is the bottom. That's the bottom. If you're over here, that's the bottom, that's the bottom, that's the bottom. This is all the bottom. It's only comparatively that's up to these who are down here. Okay? But to those who live up here, let's say that there's a civilization that lives at the top of the world, this is down to them. Okay? And they likely, you know, if they have atmosphere the way that we do, they would not be able to see us, and we would not be able to see them. And that's due to the opacity of the atmosphere. Okay, so let's discuss that. Let's say we have JayDreamerZ and Austin Whitsitt and stuff. High five to you guys. You know, I don't have any hatred towards those guys just because they changed their belief systems. I'm just proud that I retained my own. Anyways, let's say that they're out here in Antarctica, right? Way off to the side. They're watching their sun on the zenith of their sky. You would assume that they'd be able to just look down and see the continents and stuff, right? But that's not true, because as you look in that direction, the atmosphere compounds and compounds and compounds. All the particles in the atmosphere are going to block your view. It's like if you put one hand up and then another hand up and then another hand up, pretty soon you're not going to see anything, okay? It's just going to become more opaque to, you know, it's like opacity. You can turn it, like, let me give you an example. If I take this image right now and I lower the opacity, it starts to become invisible. Right? That's a clear day. So when it's not a clear day and you've got a lot of particulates in the air, then the air becomes more and more solid or difficult to see through because there's so much crap in the air that it compounds together and creates basically a wall that's blocking your sight to see further. So hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, if you're standing over here, you would not be able to see the whole world down here, right? But you would be able to see the focal point as it's moving about. way high up in the sky. Like I said, this is not drawn to scale or anything. Now, what else? Let's see, what else was I going to touch on here? Oh, so this is the ice wall. That's the simplicity behind it. Okay, this entire thing is the ice wall. So you don't go like off to the edge on some flat world and there's just like, you know, a 50, 200, 400, 500 foot wall of ice and then it's got like a shelf or a top to it. No. The entire thing is the ice wall. Okay, you should be able theoretically to walk all the way up to the top of the world, right? Which, by the way, would take you to the moon. This is up here, the apex dome is the moon. It's a true moon. So this is what casts, you know, the luminaries and stuff like that, including the projection we call the moon, which shows you what this looks like. But yeah, you'd be able to just walk to the moon, basically, which is pretty interesting, I think. Let's see, I'm trying to remember if I've covered everything. So let's say Jeranism in this picture, or Jaren, as he goes by, boom. He's in Antarctica, and he's got the zenith of his sky straight up. But in reality, I can't flip this picture around, but to us, he would be sideways, off on the pillars of the heaven, okay? On the parts of the earth that slope so high up. Now remember, that's not altitude. So it's not like they're getting higher and higher up in altitude, so it's just going to get super cold and the air is going to get super thin or whatever. Because the atmosphere distributes around the surface in a similar manner. It only gets colder because it's further away from the sun or from the focal point, okay? But he's sideways right now. Like, that's my theory, okay, is that he is literally sideways. He's not up and down like I am. If I could turn him, I'd rotate him 45 degrees, and his head would be facing my head, basically. So he would be looking that way.